Hello and welcome to the Secure Developer. I'm really excited today we've got Victoria joining us and she's going to be talking about, something is playing at the same time, sorry about that guys. Welcome to Secure Developer. We're joined by Victoria today. She's going to be talking about implementing DevSecOps in Azure. So I really hope you enjoy it. My name is Sam and I'm the community manager here, so any questions, any suggestions on upcoming sessions, please let me know. We have a Slack channel, so if you have any questions, please pop them onto our Slack channel. If you go to thesecuredeveloper.com, if you go to thesecuredeveloper.com and then go down to the Slack, but sorry about that, to Slack and join us and do online sessions with questions today. And that's enough from me though. I'm going to hand over to Victoria and she's going to get started. So Victoria, welcome.
Yeah, hi. So first of all, thank you for having me. And I guess I should start. Yes, so let me share the screen. Can you confirm that everything works?
Yep, it looks good to go.
Yeah, that's nice. So I'm going to talk about the things like how to implement DevSecOps in Azure. So all my talk is going to be around the Azure as a cloud and how we develop and put the technologies or our solutions in the cloud. First of all, let me introduce myself. And like I mentioned, my name is Victoria. I do work for the Microsoft. My official title is Cloud Solution Architect, mostly spending the time working on the cloud security, application security. So I'm helping to our customers and to plan, architect, and deploy solutions securely to the Azure cloud. In the free time, as you can see, I do spend a lot of time in hiking or driving the motorcycle. So I believe it's kind of a bit related to the extreme and, and the things. But first of all, let me show you some numbers. And I bet you may have seen them. So this correlation represents, like, as you can see, there's a 110 and 1, which represents the real situation, what you can see in mostly in the organizations when we have 100 developers, 10 operation guys, and if we get luck, we have one security person who is dealing with the security and helping the ops guys and the devs guys to make the solutions secure. And it happens like in the way like we usually shows up before the release and we're saying like, hey, that's time for the pen test and I need to check, or we need to hire some outsourced company who is going to check the security state, and it's gonna end up with the waiting for the 2 weeks or be a bit more while all the security checks are done, and then you start to delay the release. So maybe it worked very well with the waterfall model, but then came the DevOps, and when it comes to the DevOps, there are a lot of the definitions and there are a lot of the understandings how we take the DevOps. But for today, I'm going to show the definition what we are widely using in the Microsoft, which states that the DevOps is the union of people, process, and technology to enable continuous delivery of value to your end users. It may sound nice, but from the security perspective, for me, as having the background in the security around like 15 years almost, the first time when I saw the DevOps, it was a bit like the nightmare. Like, okay, now you're going to deliver the release even more often, even more faster. How I'm going to deal with that? How I'm going to help you to implement the security in the proper way in such short time amount of the time. So it was a bit scary, and at the beginning I was a bit skeptical, but the more I learned about the DevOps practices, the more I understood how it works. I realized that this is actually the good thing from all of these three perspectives, like from the people, process, and the technology, because what we can do, we can inject the security in the DevOps. And this is how we got actually this I don't want to say the buzzword like the DevSecOps, but the terminology is for today. But there are a lot of the activities what we can do when it comes to the implementing security in the DevOps. But as for today, I mostly would like to focus on one thing, what we got, and what is like one of the biggest DevOps, or I should say the popular thing in the DevOps is automation. And this is going to be more scope of today's talk, because the good thing about the automation is why not automate security then? So why not automate the security practices and implement them in the DevOps, in the CI/CD pipeline, and get a lot of the things what we used to do maybe manually or by outsourcing or at end of the development lifecycle inside of our development process by following the same approach as all DevOps adopters do by automating. So then, of course, there's a question like, okay, that may sound really nice, but where should I start? So when I'm dealing with the different customers, I have realized that it's always better to come up with kind of the patterns because we are human. Sometimes we love to have the recipes, well, what to follow. So if you are not familiar with the security or you have the limited resource of the security persons, you can do at least few patterns. You can start at least somewhere. And I'm going to try to show some of them. And I can say that by implementing at least these patterns, you're going to reduce not maybe for the half, but even for more than the half of the security problems when it comes to the security flows in the application, security flows in the infrastructure part. So the low-hanging fruit is infrastructure. Usually when it comes to the security, the easiest part is to start with the ops side, literally with the infrastructure. And there are several best practices when it comes to the cloud infrastructure, and particularly like Azure. What you can do immediately when you start to plan how all your cloud hosting is gonna look like, how you're gonna spend like resources, how you're gonna plan the resources, and how you gonna deploy the resources in Azure. And one of them is what we say usually is, and what I suggest also always is that when you plan your Azure environment, think about the subscription per environment and per project. That means that if you look back on the on-premises, we used to have like DMZ zones, internal zones, and front-end zones, and we always used to have the dev test environments and the production environments. The same thing should be transferred and reused also in the cloud. So in Azure case, if you have, for example, the project what you are developing, think about that subscription should go for the per project, and the second subscription is like for the development environment. The first is for the production. Then another thing, when it comes to the cloud, all the developers, they immediately start to build the CI/CD pipelines and push the code towards the cloud environment. And only after, mostly, we could find out that we maybe overspend the resources, like it caused the big costs, or it introduced some wide openings, like, for example, some virtual machines with the public IPs, or the non-protected web services and so on. Not to stop that development, what you can do, you can apply the policies to control transparently and proactively. That means that in Azure, there's the thing which is called Azure policies, and I'm going to show in the demo some examples, which allows you immediately and explicitly to deny or to monitor, like audit, the resources which are deployed into the Azure. So, for example, let's take the compliance part. That working and being in the European Union, for example, we know that the data protection is quite huge area, and it states that all the personal data should stay in EU zones. So what you can do, you can apply the policies which literally denies deployment of the resources outside of the European Union, like which allows only to deploy to the north or the west data centers of the Azure. Another thing, and this is like I continuously always say, there is a huge work done when it comes to the security, and especially when it comes to the Azure. And that thing is called Security Center. That's a central place where you can see status of security for each resource deployed in Azure. So even not being the security expert, what you can do, you can see if there are some problems or there are some resources deployed with the potential compliance or the security risk. So that's why, to be able to understand your security posture, you would like to enable that security center from the day one when you started to use the cloud environment, and keeping the eyes and see that everything works and everything is like at least having proper security level. Working with the cloud, when usually we start to explore the cloud resources, of course, we do it through the portal by clicking, but this is not the way how we go when it comes to the production. And the infrastructure as a code is the way how the ops guys should deploy the resources in the cloud environment. Because it doesn't give only the feeling like of the way how to control the security, because if infrastructure is as a code, I can treat it in the same way as I'm treating that as an application. I can check the same mistakes or like, the mistakes in infrastructure just by looking the code. But there are other reasons like consistency and time savings. Imagine like if you have deleted by accident some of the resource, and creating the same resource through the portal is going to take the time. If you have the infrastructure as a code, it's going to roll up immediately, like it's going to take 10-15 minutes, and the environment is always consistent. And the same code you are using for the development environment or for the production. Yes, so the next thing is what usually I advise is the production only for the CI/CD pipelines. So there is no strong reason why we should have the right to access the production environment, like the production subscription, manually through the portal. All the things should be deployed for the CI/CD pipelines. So you are delivering the code, you are delivering the infrastructure in the controlled way, and you always know that this is like the consistent, and all the security things are controlled and have checked during CI/CD pipeline, during the build and the release. And this is where it becomes like the main thing, like because in the DevOps world, and especially in the cloud world, the CI/CD pipeline is the heart of the security. This is where you can spend more time of focusing what type of the security actions, what type of the security initiatives should be deployed to prevent vulnerable code or even to prevent non-compliant infrastructure. But before jumping into the developer part, let's look more on the things from the ops part. Another thing, like I mentioned, the policies. This is where you can build what is called like the Azure governance. So what you can do when you are deploying the policies, think about them as a bouncer in front of the door. So it doesn't matter how you're deploying the resources, either through the portal or through the CLI or through the APIs, all the requests towards the resources goes through the policy engine. Even if you have not applied any policy, it's still, the policy engine is still there. So it's kind of the filtering. If I have applied, for example, the policy that no resource should be deployed with let me reformulate, the VM should not be deployed with the public resource, with the public IP. It doesn't matter if it if I'm trying to do this through the portal or through the CLI, it's not going to work because all the requests are always going to go through the policy engine. Another nice thing is what is called the Azure Blueprints. So if you follow the advice of having the project per subscription and the environment per subscription, if you end up having like 20, 30 projects and even more, it can become a bit pain to prepare every time to create the subscription with some consistent settings, like with the same policies, with the same deployed resources, like the networking or the workspaces for the log management and so on. This is where the blueprints can help you, because what they do, you formulate in the blueprints the policy definitions. You also define in the blueprints who is always going to have an access to that subscription. And you also are able to define what resources should be created when I'm creating the subscription. And then you're just applying that blueprint on the particular management group. And the management groups are the logical boxes which helps you to group your subscriptions according to some pattern. Like in this case, we can see I have grouped my different subscriptions based on the production or pre-production environment, which means that I can apply different set of the policies and different set of the rules on each of that group. And they will be always strictly followed. And if you have applied this as a blueprint, that means if I will create the new subscription and will place it inside of that logical box, all the blueprint things will be applied immediately, and the resources will be created, the policies applied, and proper users will be added. So this is what you can do, being as like on infrastructure side, being as an ops guy, immediately just to be sure that developers gonna deploy and use the resources in a more safe and compliant way, in the compliant in terms of your organization or your needs. And it's gonna help you to protect and give more freedom for the developers to do their work. Literally, develop and continuously deliver the new version of their application. So that means that the developer needs to start to focus on the application security. And let's see what we can do as the developers. This is a simplified life cycle, I would say, or the way how we deliver solution. I can say that this is more idealized. Maybe you can not agree with me, but that's the most common pattern. So how we deliver the solution? Usually we develop the solution, then we commit that to the repo, which triggers our build pipeline. So this is where we work with the continuous integration. And if the build runs successfully, if all the unit tests are done, we push that to the one of our environments. So the first step could be like the production. And then, don't push to the production immediately. I mean, like the first is always the dev environment. And when we push to the dev environment, if we test, everything goes as it plans, the features works, we go to the production, we operate, we go to the operational mode. So this is like simplified way of application lifecycle management. And actually what we can do, we can deliver or inject the security on each of step of that development. Let's see on some of the practices. And let's get back to the pre-commit or on the step when we are just developing solution. There are plenty of the things what you can do when it comes to the security. You can start with the threat modeling. So the threat modeling is, I like to say it, or I like to describe it in really simplified way, especially for the teams who never done the threat modeling. or the teams who never worked with the security on that. What you do when you get the list of planned features, what you're gonna develop, you just group your team, sit down and make the whiteboard session and try to think about attack vectors. Like, okay, if I'm an attacker, how would I try to abuse that new particular feature? And you write down these potential attack vectors, and you start to write immediately down what type of the protection steps you would like to make to be able to protect or to avoid that threat. And this is what is called in really simplified terms, this is what is threat modeling. Of course, there are plenty of threat modeling frameworks available on the market, open source solutions, commercials, but I never suggest to start with the tool. I always suggest to start with some cultural thing of just getting at least some basic habit to implement the threat modeling. Next step, when you start to develop the code, is good to have some IDE security plugins, which follows your code and checks if something, what you are typing, is potentially having security issues. Like maybe you are immediately hard coding in the code some credentials, or you're writing the function which is going to have the SQL injection and such things. And it's going to warn you in IDE immediately. So you could just look on that and fix while you're typing the code. Another thing is okay, now we are ready, to go to and push our code to the repository. You can make the pre-commit hooks, especially when it comes to the GitHub. So before your code gets checked in, it gets checked, for example, for your coding standards, which may include some security coding standards too, or it also can check that you are not trying to push the credentials inside the code towards the repository. Another practice, actually these last two practices are more focused on the human side, on our habits. So the good teams usually are having the coding standards, the way how they code. They have the agreements how they should formulate the functions, how they should name, what is naming conventions, and so on. So what you can do, you can help if you're the security person or in the development team. You can just inject some also security lines, by stating what is okay and what is not okay to have in the code. And the peer review is really strong and good habit. It is not it's, I would say it's mandatory even on the big organizations like Netflix, Amazon, Microsoft, Etsy. All of those companies, they do the peer reviews. And especially now when you can just apply with the pull request, you can explicitly state that someone needs to look on the code, because sometimes it's easier to catch someone else mistake or misconfiguration or some small mistake in the code when our eyes gets blurry when we watch our own code. So this is really good practice. And then when we have committed the code and the code is in repo and the build is happening, you can apply some automation stuff. So the good practice, as we know, when we are running after the quality, which is a huge part of the DevOps, we write the unit tests. So we should also think about the security unit tests in the same way as we write the classical unit tests. Why not to have the security user stories, and why not later to transfer them in all of the tests what we do as a classical test. So then what you can do is to have static code analysis tool, which can follow and check your code in the repository and see if there are still some security vulnerabilities or potential security flaws. From my experience, I can say that implementing the static code analysis tool is installing and getting the thing running takes maybe the few weeks, but getting the habit for the developers to use it, it takes a bit more, because it's a human factor. So usually when I'm working, I'm spending much time with the developers getting that habit to use, and not to ignore the reports from the static code analysis tools. The last but not like less important is a dependency management. In today's world, when we develop a lot the things by using third-party libraries, and especially when it comes to the open source libraries. And usually when I start to work with the development teams, I'm asking them, do you have some life cycle for your libraries, for your packages? How do you do the updates? How you're sure that that library, what you have included, is still used in your code and is needed? Because you rely on security for the code, which is written by the third party, but by the open community, you don't know how secure it is. So if I would choose one practice from all of these three, I would start definitely with the dependency management, and by integrating in the pipeline the practices to check also the third-party libraries. And of course, when we deliver the solution to at least to the dev stage, what we can do, we can focus on the infrastructure as a code. So we can, since our infrastructure is now as a code, we can apply the same patterns what we apply for the code by the tools who are able to check infrastructure as a code syntax and predict and see potential misconfigurations of the infrastructure. We can apply different security scanning tools, and especially in today's world, when we are using, for example, containers and the Docker and all of that stuff, Kubernetes became so popular. What you can do, you can apply the security scanning towards the container repositories. You can check the cloud configuration, and there are, of course, big role plays the security acceptance testing. In the same way as we do with the classical acceptance testing, we need to focus on the security side of the solution too. And when we are in the production, we still can repeat some of the things what we have looked during the dev and during the release, because like I mentioned, even there is a good practice not to give the access to the production, but go through the pipeline. There are still human mistakes happens, or there is like, critical bug, and we tend to fix this on the production directly. So it's worth to recheck the configuration again. And still, even if we speak about the DevOps world, even if we speak about the continuous integration, continuous delivery, when we push release like quite often, there should be a decision made when you would like to have the penetration testing, because it is a really important part. Sometimes if you're delivering really sensitive or the new product, maybe it's worth to stop for the 2 weeks and have the proper penetration testing to be sure that you have not missed anything while implementing all other practices in your pipeline, in your development. And of course, when it comes to the operations, the critical part is monitoring. And this is what I like in the DevOps. DevOps is all about the monitoring, collecting telemetry, and getting the feedback and learning and seeing how application behaves, how it's used. By collecting this data, we also can see if that application is overused, misused, or used not in the proper way. So I would say, like, if we don't have the monitoring, or the monitoring is our customers, that's not the monitoring. Then you can't say that you have done everything when it comes to the security. Another, like, last thing what I always try to speak is about the blameless postmortems, because it is really important to grow up the culture in the team of no fear of speaking and no fear from own mistakes. Agile and the DevOps, we always hear about fail fast, learn fast approach. And I believe at some point it should be also applied on the security. It doesn't mean that we need, like, intentionally fail in the security, but we tend to have the mistakes, and it's not possible to build the security like 100%. Nobody can do this, but that's the most important. Is if you got the security incident, is to learn what was the root cause, how to fix, how you reacted, because this is a really good lesson, and it helps you to prepare and be prepared for such cases if they're gonna happen in the future. Okay, as you can see, I focused a lot, and I spoke about different practices, but team's resources is limited, and our talk is also limited. I would like to focus on some of the things what you can do immediately after the talk, without huge pain in your team, even not having the security on the board. So there are a few things. This is particular example where I'm using the Azure, and I'm using the Azure DevOps, which used to be known as VSTS or TFS on the premises. And I'm having the developer. So as you can see, I have grouped the subscriptions. I do have the development subscription, and I do have the QA stage subscription and the production subscription. I have applied Azure policies and the management group. So I have some confidence level that my policies at least are followed on the subscription. And regular development lifecycle is something like this. So you develop the code, you create the separate branch like the develop branch, you push your code to the develop branch, which triggers CI/CD pipeline. And if everything is fine, it goes to the development subscription. And if we are happy and we see that the functionality or the feature, what we have delivered works, we take and merge it to the master branch, which again triggers the same CI/CD pipeline, but it goes in this case to different environments like the QA stage subscription, where the business or the users can test it. It depends what the release management flow you have. And then if everything fine, we go to the production. So this is one of the common ways how we deliver the software. And this is just by shown with some of tool examples. So what you can do, you already can apply some of the tools, and I gave the examples. So when it comes to the Visual Studio Code or any editor, IDE, unless you're using Notepad, you have a lot of the choices when it comes to the extensions, what you can install, which gonna help you to check the security while you're developing. And then there are other things what you can apply in CI/CD pipeline, and you can implement this in this case in Azure DevOps pipelines. And this is the set of the toolkits what you can apply on the subscription level, and some of them actually most of them comes with no cost for you. And there are plenty good of the documentation which helps a lot to implement, even you are not the security expert or that not your subject matter expertise. Okay, I think it's enough for the talking in theory. Let me show you some example. And let's see. Okay, I hope you're able to see my screen. So this is the Azure DevOps, and I have created some build pipeline. What I'm doing, I'm deploying the solution, which is called WebGoat. By the way, if you're interested in the learning about the web vulnerabilities, the WebGoat is the most vulnerable solution. So this is developed by the OWASP community to learn how to find and how to protect from the OWASP top 10 security flows. And what I did, I have deployed the WebGoat as a container in my ACI, so Azure Container Instances. And I'm storing the container. Yes?
Could you zoom in a little bit?
Sorry?
Can you zoom into your screen a bit so that we can see a little bit more clearly?
Just zoom it, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just like a little bigger.
sure. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Let me see. Not this one. How does it work?
That's perfect. That was my favorite. Thank you so much. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, good. So I have deployed this application with the intention because I need to find some security vulnerabilities. And it is hosted, like I mentioned, in container instances. And the container itself is stored in Azure Container Repository. And I'm delivering that solution. Let me zoom it also. I'm delivering that solution for the pipeline. And as you can see, I have applied the different security tools already in my pipeline. So on the build pipeline, I have separated several stages. The first stage, I would like immediately when the code gets to the repository and the build pipeline is triggered, I would like to check for the credentials. I don't want to see the credentials in the code. So what I'm doing, I'm running the credential scanner extension, which is, let me move. So create scan. So this is like the free extension, what you can get on the marketplace for, not this one, let's take this one. What you can get from the suite, which is called Microsoft Security Code Analysis. That suite contains at least 6 tools for the different things like the credential scanner, Bean Scheme, TS-Link, Rosalind Analyzer, which helps you to check the security while you're like building the code and you're working with the code. And that extension is in a private preview, but if you're using the Azure DevOps, you can just sign up and get it for free. And what we did, we shared the tools what we are using when we are building our product. So what I'm doing, I'm running the credential scanner. And since let's pretend I have no idea how to configure, I'm good to go with the defaults. The only thing what I need to do is to give the scanning folder, which particularly I would like to scan for the potential credentials. So in this case, I'm giving the sources directory, so the main repository, which is located here. If we look the code itself, let's see. So I'm giving that Java code for the scanning, all these files. Then the next step, what I'm doing, like, of course, I would like, while I'm building the code, I would like to check the third-party libraries. And you can do this with the different extensions from the different companies like Snack, WhiteSource, SonarQube. And in this particular case, I just grabbed the free extension, which is available on the market, which scans the libraries and open source libraries. I'm trying to speak and zoom at the same time. It scans for the libraries, for the security, and for the licensing part. Okay, so seems I'm good to know, good to go. But now I remember what I'm dealing with the containers, which means that potentially maybe something could be developed, or the container could be developed, configured in the way what I don't feel being acceptable. So what I can do, I can actually, when I'm placing my container while on the build stage, I can check the container repository and check that particular container for the vulnerabilities, or even more for the my security policies. Like, for example, I don't want to have the container which is going to have SSH port, or the libraries, or the, I would say, the tools installed in the container. For that, I'm using the thing what is called Anchor. Particularly, I'm focusing on the open source solution. So what I'm doing, I have implemented that Anchor and I'm running that in AKS, in my separate subscription, which is dedicated only for the security, where I'm maintaining all the different security tools and giving the access to the anchor to run and check my container towards security vulnerabilities, and additionally for some policy violations. Like I mentioned, that I don't want to have the particular services running on my container. So I added the steps. As you can see, the steps is basically the bash task, which runs and scans image from my repository and creates the report. Creates the report with the vulnerabilities in the JSON format. So these are the steps what I can do immediately on while being on the build pipeline. And if we're gonna look on some of the results, let's see, for example, for the credential scanning. When you have run credential scanning, you immediately can check those and see if there are some matches. And as you can see, I have identified that some of the files are containing the plain texted passwords or connection strings. Of course, it may not be handful to have it here in console log. What you can do, you can just add additional step which creates the report in the format of the CVS, for example, and then you can analyze and just check it. You even can break the pipeline, and I will show one example how you can break the pipeline if their security is not compliant. When we have done the build and we have pushed our webgoat, I also run the my anchor. So I have checked the vulnerabilities in container by the anchor tool, and I'm getting the JSON results. And let me see some of examples what I got, and let me zoom it a bit more if I can. Yes. Let's kill it. Don't want me right now. So as you can see, this is particular JSON format which states what type of the vulnerabilities I have in my container, on what I need to pay the attention. And also additionally, I get the explanation what the things, what the CVA is behind that vulnerability, so I can just follow the link and learn more. Additionally, like I mentioned, I can also follow my policy in genes. And let me see that I do have this example that I'm running like I'm trying to create the service which is going to run for the ports 22. Even we have agreed that all our Docker images should not have it. I can always to check and then decline this type of the deployment. So, and the last thing that I have not looked, that was the libraries. When we run our build pipeline, we also get the report around libraries. So what we can do, we can immediately to check if our third-party open source libraries are having some vulnerabilities, or there are some non-appropriate licenses. Because I think if you're developing some commercial tool and you're including some open source library which contains, which is licensed under the license which requires you to open source, this is not something what you would like to see in your production, right? So when I went to the, let me see, how can I get rid of that? Sorry, it's like a bit annoying. Yes. Yes. Then I went to the production. As you can see, in my case, I don't have infrastructure as a code. But what I can do, I can still check my infrastructure if it contains some, infrastructure non-compliance or the security flaws. And I can do this by the extension, which is part of a secure DevOps kit, or the practices secure practices for the Azure, and particularly the extension, which helps you to check all your infrastructure according to the sum of best practices, or what we suggest when it comes to the Azure. And what you do, you get immediately like the report when you are delivering or when you're creating your release pipeline. You immediately can even break your release and say like, hey, what you're going to try to deploy as infrastructure is having some security vulnerabilities or misconfigurations, what we believe is not appropriate. Like, let's take, for example, there are some things, let's see, regarding to the Azure Key Vault, or particularly even now, there are some practices included when it comes to the container registry. So these suggestions, what you can use immediately, even you're not like the security expert, you will get it with, as an output in your pipeline. Okay, this is like around the pipeline itself. And if you're curious how to deploy or how to create that, actually, I wrote the article, or I have published it with on my GitHub. And then you can just take your time and play around and see how it can be implemented. So there are step-by-step instructions, and I really appreciate if you will give some feedback. In a way, I'm working all the time on that, and I'm going to improve the documentation too. So when we are in the production, the first thing, like I mentioned, where you would like to focus when it comes to the Azure and the cloud practices is the security center. And it deserves its own stage, because I can talk about the security center itself like around 1 hour. But let me show some most common features, or what you could pay attention immediately. So what you can see is you can get security hygiene, like you can see the compliance or security state of your resources, like VMs or even like cloud services or the application services. What type of the recommendations they are having, like how you can improve the security state. And some of them actually allows you to fix the security vulnerability or the security recommendation with the one-click remediation click. And currently we also have introduced in the preview the same security view for the containers. So you even can look on the container suggestion, what is wrong, what type of the security misconfigurations are in your container stuff, what shall be applied. The nice thing is that it covers not only the application, it covers also infrastructure part. And to make, I guess, a bit more fun, there's a thing which is called Secure Score, or I would like to say a bit more of element of the gamification, which allows you to see what type of the practices or what security vulnerabilities prioritized, what you need to fix immediately to get your security state even better. Like with one click, you need to fix with the for example, in this case, like you have the web application which is deployed on the classical HTTP, and you can fix it, and your secure score is going to improve immediately. And also there are some other things, like when it comes to the policies, you can apply a lot of different policies, and maybe sometimes you don't know where to start. And there are different policies which are like what we have developed as a group of policies according to the most common standards, like security standards like ISO 27001. So what you can do, you can apply that policy set, and you can see how compliant you are according to these regulatory, to this particular ISO 27001, and what actions you need to apply on your cloud resources immediately to fix uncompliance. Yes, that's kind of bit really short intro on the security because there are a lot of way more functionality. But usually when I work with the development teams, I say like, just enable it. Maybe not so like you can start with the basic level. At least you're gonna see and you have feeling what is happening with your resources in the Azure, what is happening with your subscriptions, what the things you need to fix. And at least to get better security. It's kind of a bit of magic, like, you feel as being security expert just by watching what you see on the screen. Yeah, that was a bit short intro, or I would say the demo. Like I mentioned, that article particularly you can read and follow on your own pace and try to implement some of these extensions if you are using the Azure DevOps pipelines. If there are other CI/CD pipelines, what you are using, the same practices, what I have showed on one of first slide. Yes, let me repeat them. Not this one. These ones you can implement on. It doesn't matter what type of the tools you're having, like, So it's quite critical to understand these practices. And yes, so there are so many hot takes, and like I mentioned, after this session, if you're dealing with the Azure Cloud and Boost subscriptions, the first thing what you can do is you can start with the dividing your projects per and the environments per subscriptions. Apply some basic policies, like at least if you don't know which of them to start to apply, you can grab the set what is provided immediately in the Azure with the suggestions. And of course, enable the security center. Think about this AZSK extension. I showed extension which is focusing on already deployed environment, but if you are dealing with ARM templates, you can apply the step which is called AZSK ARM template checker, and it's going to check the templates and will give the same output what we have seen in the release pipeline, but based on your template configuration. Then you apply. When the next step is, I would suggest always to think about the third-party libraries. So choose the tool which is gonna check the security of the third-party libraries and the packages. And if you're curious about different type of security code analysis tools, there are for free. You just the only thing what you need to do is to sign up and give the name of your DevOps organization, and you will get those extensions, and you will be able to apply them as steps in your CI/CD pipeline. Of course, there are a lot of different solutions available on the market, and when it comes to the open source, I really like Secure DevOps Toolchain Posture, created by the Suns, which gives some observability, and it has the list of the tools what you can use. It doesn't matter which cloud, either it's Amazon or Azure specific. It gives you like some of the examples of open source tools or the cloud practices, what you can like apply on each of the development step. There are the resources, and I'm gonna share the slides on my GitHub, so you can take the time and look and read about these resources, about these practices. And if you have more questions, you can just follow me on the Twitter and ask me directly, or look on my GitHub and give some feedback. Use the documentation and yes, provide some, like I mentioned, the feedback. Okay, I think I used almost all my time, and I left some minutes for the questions. So.
Perfect, thank you so much, Victoria. There's a lot of chatter going on in the Slack group, and I think everyone really enjoyed it. We actually had a bit of a recommendation request. Mark has asked if you have any top recommendations on IDE security plugins. or something like that for developers.
Okay, let me see. Like, I'm just trying to find.
I can just, so I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I see. EDS security plugins. Yeah, I see it.
Yeah.
So what it comes to my mind, it depends which IDEs you're using. There are a lot of for the Visual Studio and for the Eclipse. When it comes to the code, it's still less. Bin scheme, what is coming in my mind immediately, but I can collect the list and add in my resources in the slide.
And we can also add it to the resources on the session page, and we'll get it over to you, Mark, on Slack as well. I know Victoria is also a member of the Slack group, so she can answer and add those in there. But I think that's all the questions we have at the moment. So thank you so much, Victoria. Really appreciate you being with us for Secure Development. Hopefully it won't be your last time with us. For those of you listening, if you've got any questions and you're watching this post-live event, please feel free to still pop your questions into the Slack channel, and either Victoria or one of our other community members can get them answered for you. As a reminder, we run sessions every 2 weeks. Our next session is with Seth Law and Ken Johnson, and they'll be speaking about Seth and Ken's excellent adventures in secure code review. So we're looking at how to do more sort of coding reviews and things like that. Please join us. It should be a great session. And other than that, you can find us on Twitter at @SecureDevs, Slack, and on our website, esecuredevelopment.com. Join us. I hope you enjoyed that, and thank you so much. We will see you all again next time.